the answers.
Oh, it's a question. Right.
Protect the fund.
I thought you were telling us what.
Yeah, protecting the environment, nice. Anyone else?
Reducing cost.
Reducing costs, yeah.
Saving animals.
Saving animals and plants. Cool. So it is because you're going to say so, but it isn't as well. So the real reason is you got the nail on the head. It's after protecting our environment, not just for us, but for those generations yet to come. So that's really what sustainability is making sure that what we instill for generations to come is actually useful and they're not trying to tidy up all of our problems. So what we want are these nice blue-green pastures, everything, the rivers, the mountains, everything in between. We want it looking pristine, clean, green New Zealand, right? What we don't want is this. So both of those photos are actually from New Zealand. The bottom left one, that's a stream that was a whole lot of rubbish got swept down as a result of a landfill bursting its banks. We'll talk about that a bit later. And the top one is actually from a similar event where rubbish was just strewn up and down a beach because a landfill burst its banks and got swept out to sea and then back on shore. So you can see the large contributing item in there is plastic. So most of this will actually be prioritising plastic and what can we actually do to minimise it. Awesome. So a bit broader for those people who know sustainability. You are obviously aware of emissions and the spotlight those had at the moment. So I thought I'd just provide some insight as to where waste or emissions from waste actually come from. So you can see this is from 2018, New Zealand's emissions. We're a pretty agricultural dependent country. 48% of all our greenhouse gas emissions came from agriculture. The next one, energy. This actually really surprised me when I saw this because I thought we're actually pretty good on the renewable energy front, but you've probably seen all the news about coal recently and importing coal from Indonesia. So that was eye-opening for me. And then little old waste sits about 5%. And so how you might be asking, how does waste actually cause emissions? So the main contributor for waste is around organic material decomposing in landfills. I'll talk a little bit about that later as well, just because we sort of go through into all of the different recycling streams, and it's a good talking point around food waste. Awesome. To warm you guys up, I've got a couple of pop quiz questions. So first off the bat, how many pieces of litter are discharged from the Waitemata Harbour stormwater daily? Is it A, 3,000 pieces of litter, B, 7,000, C, 16,000, or D, 28,000?
And that's only the Waitemata.
Yeah.
D.
D. You doing blue?
I'm going to see.
Yeah, you guys are right. It is pretty doom and gloom. The worst part about this is that it's from a study from 1996. Yeah. So you think since then we've seen an increase in population, we've seen arguably an increase in packaging, we've seen more and more plastic on shelves, and we've also seen our consumptive behaviours just go through the roof. We're wanting more and more and more as society to fuel our need for items, for objects and materials. Pretty scary. Next one is in 2018 per capita, so the average Kiwi, how much did we produce and dispose of? The average Kiwi, did they produce 570 kilograms, 620 kilograms, 725 kilograms, or 780 kilograms within a year?
I'm sticking with my D.
Yeah.
D? Bit of a theme going? Yeah. So D. So the average Kiwi produces and disposes of 780 kilograms to landfills. That's just municipal waste. So what we produce at home and at work. It's not including the construction and demolition waste. That was ranked, I think, per capita was ranked about 3rd or 4th in OECD countries, which are the worst contributors to the waste problem. So I think it was USA, it could have been Germany up there as well, which is surprising. So as a nation, we're pretty bad at wasting. Last one, some of you might have seen this if you're an avid Netflix watcher. There's a plastics documentary out there. Would recommend you guys watch it if you're interested. What percentage of all plastics ever produced have not been recycled? Is it A, 35.5%, B, 55%, C, 66.5%, or D, 90.5%?
D.
No, I shouldn't have asked it. Yeah, so it's D. So 90.5% of all plastics ever produced have not been recycled. So that includes all the plastics in cars. It also includes our plastic drink bottles, everything in between. And I think there's a further 8% which has been incinerated, which is pretty nasty in itself as an outcome. So where's all this plastic ending up? First step, if it's lucky, it gets put in a landfill. I have purposely blurred out the logo on the truck in the background. It is one of our competitors, but you can probably make it out. Reclaim doesn't own and we're not affiliated to any landfills, so I'm trying to make a point here. But landfills, so that's the first step. Landfills are pretty bad. There's two main impacts or implications of depositing stuff in landfill, well, three. The first one being that essentially what we're doing is we're giving a time capsule of our current problems to future generations. Pretty bad. The second one is that all landfills eventually leach. So do you guys understand what leachate is?
Connecting into the ground and going into the underground water.
Yeah.
That's really the main thing, really. It's a circle thing, circular thing.
Yeah, so in
They
short,
have to be there.
yeah. So leachate is essentially what it is all of the stuff that you put in landfill, over time it will decompose. Without oxygen, essentially it rots. And when all that material rots, what happens is all of the toxic juices leach out, and that's what's a leachate, is that yucky brown toxic substance that is the end product. Most landfills nowadays are pretty good, and they've got all sorts of different layers between the surrounding earth and the actual landfill. But that's not to say they don't still leak. So I think the US EPA, Environmental Protection Authority, came out a couple of years ago and said all landfills eventually leak. So it's still a massive issue. The other reason landfills are pretty bad is around, obviously with climate change occurring, we're seeing more and more frequent and more severe weather events. So floods, tornadoes, storms, everything. As a result, these landfills will eventually burst their banks. So that's those photos that I showed earlier. So there's a landfill down on the west coast of the South Island called Fox River Landfill. And that, with a storm, it's, as the name suggests, it lies right next to the Fox River. As a result of a storm, that landfill bursts its banks. And as a result of that, plastic waste, every debris possible you can think of, was washed up and down the shoreline of that river and eventually the beach. So plastic from that landfill and other debris was actually found 20 kilometres downstream. So it's pretty nasty.
Where are some of the landfills in Auckland?
What's that, sorry?
Where are some of the landfills in Auckland?
Red Vale is one, which is a waste management one. Then we've got one out in Tuakau, I believe, which is an enviro waste one. Yeah.
It's called Hamilton Downs. It's on the way to Hamilton.
There you go.
You've got one near Hanua,
Oh, really?
and you've got lots of old ones.
Yeah.
So North Shore, Gravel Road, is an old landfill.
Yeah.
The gas is still escaping from.
Yeah.
Mm.
And Rosedale Road, is that near Rosedale Road?
Yeah. If you go to Point Chef, Nelda Reef, there's a dog park down there. If you take your dog down there and on a nice still day, stand there by the water's edge and look in, and you'll see bubbles coming up as there's bubbles still escaping from the old landfill.
There used to be one up It's now next to us, and
Well, the
it's
big
now
house in one
being
of the-
built on, but up by Albany, like with
Yeah,
a,
that's the one, gravel road.
that's good road, yeah.
Sorry, one silly question. So for the landfill, if we stop using it for a certain year, can it be developed like housing, because we normally build housing on landfill?
Yes and no. Personally, I wouldn't want to live on a landfill because you've got,
Yeah, but we don't have enough space to live, right? So
Yeah.
normally we build apartments.
Yeah.
After stop using it for
so that's,
years, then we build apartment there.
yeah, urban sprawl isn't really my realm.
Yeah, we
but
can smell
I'd say
that. Yeah, we can smell it. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
there are an example off the top of my head is that as a display of Red Vale's environmental certification,
Yeah.
they have a farm on top of the landfill that's already been covered up, with sheep grazing. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the.
They're just applying for a new landfill to be developed in Doan Valley,
Yeah,
which you might have heard of.
Yeah.
Hey, at the end of the day, the way we consume things at the moment, we need landfills.
Yeah.
There isn't an alternative.
Yeah.
We just have to get better at diverting what we put in landfills.
and preventing waste getting to the landfill in the first place. Yeah. But I mean, if you're thinking about structural, if you're putting big beams into a landfill, there's all this compressible matter in there. It probably wouldn't be that structurally sound. Where else is plastic ending up? Got a little bit sidetracked. The next step is ecosystems. So sorry for the confronting photo, but if plastics doesn't end up in the landfill, or don't end up in the landfill, they end up in ecosystems. So mountains, rivers, we've got forests, oceans, everything in between, including wildlife. So I think there's a stat about albatross chicks. So about 500,000 albatross chicks are born each year. About 200,000 die. 100,000 of those die from dehydration or starvation. The chicks that died from those causes had twice as much plastic in their stomachs than chicks that died from other causes. So it's everywhere, yeah. And if we're thinking about it from a completely human-centric perspective, the nasty thing about this is that they have a habit of making their way up the food chain, and we're at the top. So plastics have been found in ourselves and all of the items that we consume as well. So pretty much every plastic water bottle you buy will have microplastics in it. That doesn't put you off using plastic, then not too sure what will. On top of that, it's been found on Mount Everest, it's been found in the deepest ocean trenches. It is literally everywhere.
We're breathing in there.
Yeah, we're breathing it. And there's a statistic that is from the University of New South Wales in Oz, and they found that each year the average human will consume a credit card's worth of microplastics. Ingesting that, yeah. Which plastic is a derivative of petrol, so it's pretty much a carcinogen when you boil it down. So it's pretty bad. If that doesn't stir you, then
So that's a fingerprint, right?
yeah,
So that's
a
on the end of your
fingerprint.
thumb.
Yeah, I think that's just
What can be there.
yeah. So it's pretty frightening. Cool. So how do we change it then? How can we stop this take, make, waste system? So I thought I'd give you a little bit of a spiel about linear economy versus circular economy. Has anyone heard of the linear economy? You probably have in a abbreviated form. So the linear economy is essentially take, make, waste. So we take materials from the ground, we make these products, which are pretty low quality, using non-renewable energy sources. We use them once, and then we just throw them in the landfill. So it's this linear economy that we just take, and then eventually we just waste it. Because the materials, the items are such poor quality, the only realistic option we have is to throw it in the landfill. So how can we, so that's what we're currently doing. What we need to shift to preserve space in landfills and also lead towards a low carbon economy as well, is shifting to a circular economy. So you can't really see that. But there's two main cycles. So you've got your biological and your technical cycle. Circular economy, in short, is making sure that everything has a life after its final use. So for example, if we're talking about the biological cycle, we're talking about anything which is organic in nature. So it could be the plant, it could be the food over there, it could be my cotton shirt if it was 100% cotton. And what happens is we take materials from renewable sources, so plants, regenerative sources. Then we make a material or make an item which is of high quality that can be reused over and over and over. Once it can't be reused, then we repair it. And then once we can't repair it, we recycle. So with a shirt, for example, I reuse it and it gets to the end of the life. If it's 100% cotton, I can compost that. And that compost then helps nurture plants and nurture growth. And then ideally what would happen is that compost goes to a cotton farm, and then eventually that cotton is then made into new shirts. Similar story goes for the technical cycle, which is more around non-organic, so plastic, metals. What we want to do is we want to be able to reutilize those resources, and then we want to obviously take resources from circular outcomes. So a can, for example, we take the can and we manufacture a really nice sturdy bike that can be reused and repaired and everything. At the end of that, the bike or the metal components can be melted down and we get another bike or another can, whatever it may be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? Cool. So that's recycling. From a material standpoint, that is essentially what recycling is. Awesome. So how do we go about doing this? The first step is to understand the waste hierarchy. So this is pivotal in understanding the circular economy. So at the top, we've got the most preferred disposal option. At the bottom, we've got least preferred. So at the top, the most preferred option is obviously to reduce consumption. So, and that's particularly of those resource-dependent materials. So essentially, it's going down the supermarket aisle, I spot a chocolate bar, and then I'm like, actually, I don't actually need that. I don't need the packaging that comes with it, and I don't actually need the chocolate itself. Tough to do, but that is essentially what reducing consumption is about. One step further, I want that chocolate, but I want to purchase only the chocolate and not the packaging, or I want to purchase packaging which is readily recyclable. Next step down the waste hierarchy is reuse. So instead of going out and buying a coffee in a takeaway coffee cup, we're now going out and buying it in a reusable coffee cup. We can reuse that over and over and over again. Next step down is recycling. So obviously I'm from a recycling company, but what I'm saying here it displays pretty well that we're in a bit of a moral dilemma. Obviously we want our business to thrive, but there's a lot better things that we can do before recycling which have far greater environmental outcomes. So recycling, next up, is being able to choose packaging which actually is recyclable. And so we'll touch on that a little bit later around what we actually do need to choose to give that best end of life outcome. And then the other two, I don't really like talking about those. Is that okay? Sweet. So how do we recycle right then? First step of the way is understanding what contamination is. Does anyone know what contamination is from a recycling perspective?
It's not washing your plastic containers and stuff, so I throw away little bottles without rinsing and maybe meat trays without washing and stuff.
Yeah. Good explanation. So the way I'd extend that is saying that food is a material which is in the wrong waste stream. So in that example, what it is food is contamination, or it's contaminating the plastics recycling stream. So more broadly, it's more about material that's in the wrong waste stream, essentially. Could be food waste in the plastics or commingled recycling. It could be cardboard in the food waste. It could be paper in the food waste. It could be glass in the paper, etc., etc. Cool. That makes sense? Sweet. Okay, so what do you guys have on site? This is from Judith, so I'm assuming that it's right. So it's cardboard, mixed recycling, food waste, secure document destruction, print cartridges, and general waste. Sounds about right?
Yeah.
Cool. Sweet, so what can't go in the cardboard recycling bin? And I've actually got a couple of these. Well, Judith has very kindly supplied me with some examples.
Diligently went through the bin and asked.
Yeah,
Cool
stuff.
cool. So first up, I might just go through what's on the picture. First up is obviously pizza box. Everyone looking at that like, yeah, that's cardboard. Yeah, nice. So if you can see, I'm not sure if you can, it's actually got a little slip that goes underneath the pizza. That slip is compostable, it's actually cardboard. So that can go in your compost, it's great brown matter if you shred it up. The idea behind that slip is it means that you don't get food waste in the cardboard bin. So the cardboard box itself is completely recyclable if there's no food waste on it.
So is that slip in every pizza box?
No, most. Yeah,
How can you tell?
good question. I guess it sort of comes down to how much you're willing to put in there. And I guess at your end of things, it's more about not attracting rats. At our end of things, a lot of that stuff will come off in the wash. But that's not to say I won't attract rats at our site either. So
You have to make the effort to
yeah,
go to get your pizza from somewhere you know has a liner on it.
or the extreme example is our ops manager, and he'll literally go through with a knife and scrape all the extra pizza off.
Or you take.
That's the
your own
extreme
container.
end. Yeah, or you take them.
So if you have a pizza box without the lining,
Yeah.
and it's just like you don't have any food scraps on it, but the grease is linked through, is that still like?
A little bit of grease is okay. Yeah. If there's no dyes in the box itself, that's actually really good brown matter for a compost. So just cut the greasy parts out, put the cardboard in the recycling, and then the greasy parts can be food waste or general waste.
Most of the big brand pizza sellers here do it right.
Yeah, I think that's actually a Pizza Hut one. So I think most of them are okay. Yeah.
I think it's like all in this one.
Once you start asking the question,
Yeah.
Yeah.
once you all start asking the question, then they'll all get in line.
So the other items on here, plastic, paper, so when we recycle things or recycle paper and cardboard, what we're actually recycling, next time you've got a bit of paper in front of you, just tear a little bit and look at, along the tear, you can actually see little fibers. So we're not actually recycling the paper, what we're recycling are those fibers. And so cardboard is a completely different type of fiber to paper. So paper has a separate bin and is recycled separately. And
So I've
it's
just changed our photocopy paper to bamboo. So have I done a good thing by doing that? Or not necessarily? Is that just like advertisers?
Not if you're putting it in your paper bin.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's the same with there's stone-based paper as well, mineral-based paper,
Right.
which again, it's not actually a wood-based fiber. So this is a wood-based fiber, whereas the stone paper or the bamboo paper is actually a completely different fiber and can't be recycled with regular and renewable sources.
Take it back.
Yeah.
You guys provide a best practice list of stuff for businesses like that?
So we've got plenty of posters available, and I'll share that. during
Yes,
the-
they've got a great website as well. Look up everything. So it's good for us to have posters as well.
Coffee cups, compostable or not, they're not cardboard. They might have a little bit of cardboard fibre in there, but they've also got a plastic layer in there, which makes up the cardboard recycling process. Okay, into the goodies. What do you guys reckon about that?
Good place to be.
Nice. Most people will be like, no, that's sweet. Yeah, so the plastic or the waxy, shiny part actually deems this non-recyclable and non-compostable, unless it says on the bottom, which it doesn't, this is compostable. So that, unless it says commercially compostable, normally it's around the lip, that is non-recyclable, that is non-compostable.
That's just landfill.
So next time you go to Hello Mister,
Take those balls.
Take the reusable.
takeaway bowls.
It's nice.
Yeah.
Or just a plate, maybe not, but.
So something that will help you with your knowledge of what you're buying is an understanding of the technology of how paper or cardboard is recycled. Essentially, it's thrown in a bath full of water and it turns to mush. And then it's then forced through a sieve so that you're separating all the fibres. So if that's got a wax on it, it can't break down because the wax is actually there to stop it breaking down.
Okay.
And we'll clog up the
And
sieve.
stop it leaking.
Exactly. So to stop water permeating the actual fibre. So if the process is to break it down with water, if it's made to not break down with water, then it's not going to work. So that's a way to think about what you're doing. When you buy your magazines, if your magazine cover's laminated, there's no need to do that anymore. They can laminate it with an aqueous laminate. They don't have to put a plastic laminate. So to recycle that, you've actually got to take the cover off. Nobody does that because there's no value in the product. So just so you know when you're buying stuff.
What about that?
It's got Urzuki all over it.
Nice.
That's
So
got-
it's
Yeah,
not-
it's material.
it's plastic.
100% recycled paper, nice. So yeah, best practice would actually be remove that plastic. So that plastic, if you've got some diligent person on site who wants to take soft plastic to a local supermarket, that plastic go in there. But that is then contamination in the cardboard or mixed recycling, unless you remove the plastic.
And is that the same for envelopes as well, that have windows?
I'll get
I
to
did come across,
that.
So that board is actually a box board. It's not cardboard.
Yeah.
Cardboard traded as corrugated.
Yeah.
There's 75 different types of commodity listed paper to trade. And that, if it goes into a corrugated cardboard recycling system, it will be pulled out and either thrown away or put in a different avenue. So again, what we generally think of as cardboard might be card, but it's not OCC, which is old corrugated container, which is what most people recycle as cardboard.
You're beating me to it. You're stealing all of my thunder.
That's right.
So what do we want in cardboard streams then? It's essentially that. So see the little corrugations? That's what we want. And we want it flattened. So when we come to pick up, not that we pick up your cardboard currently, but when we come to pick up your cardboard in the future, what we want to pick up is cardboard. We don't want to pick up air. We don't want to be charging you to pick up your air.
So sorry, coming back to that tissue box then, if we
Yep.
remove the plastic, where does that go then?
So the best bin for that would be in your paper
And flattened or squashed?
and the plastic removal.
And so the paper is, if we separate paper from cardboard, that's the ideal.
Yeah, so they're two different fibres.
Recycling process.
So
Yeah,
it's
and
not
recycling.
corrugated, is it not in our recycling?
In
sense?
general recycling terminology, yeah. So when we say a cardboard stream, it's OCC, so old corrugated containers.
So you use Rubbish Direct to pick up what they call a commingled paper service, generally. So they have a sort line. They will try to separate out as much of the commingled paper products that you put in that.
And then because there's so much contamination, well, there likely is, not from you guys, but from other people. You think about a truck, it goes, those trucks can collect close on 8 tons. So there's lots of people in between your and our site.
It's just much better that we separate it at source rather than. Yeah, so
Yeah.
when we do a mixed recycling bin then, are we just giving someone something that they have to go and sort out themselves?
You're doing two things. You are highly creating the possibility of contamination that you can't sort later on. And then secondly, yes, somebody has to
Someone
sort.
to go through
And if the
sort out.
value isn't in the base product, then it's not going to be sorted, it's just going to be designated for landfill.
Councils, in talks to align their thinking on what can be recycled and what can't be.
Yes.
It's all different for every single council.
The answer is yes and no. Councils, the problem is we start to fall over into the economic side. For councils to do it properly, they've got to give you, let's say, 10 bins,
Yes.
and then your rates go through the roof because they're sending 10 trucks. You can't park on any of your streets near home because there's 10 trucks trying to get through every day.
Yeah.
So they're trying to pick it up the most economically sensible way, and then employ the highest grade of technology to try and separate it.
Okay.
But it doesn't work that well. You're 100% right. Separating at source is the best way to go.
So Reclaim are big advocates of separating at source, as you can tell, because not only that, it also means that the quality of material that we actually gain is far greater than if we're sifting through and having to employ people to do that.
So if we had, our 10, paper bags, and we put different things in them, and then put them in the recycling bin, but the truck just tips it upside down and it's kind of wasted, and it's sort of tied up, right?
You mean that part?
So
Yeah, no, I'm saying punk, yeah.
yeah, so that's commingle is essentially everything you throw in the bin is going into the same bin at the other end, going across the same sort of.
And they don't have, so in Auckland, our residential waste is sorted at Anihanga, at a place run by Visi. And they take everything in the rubbish trucks and they dump it on the belts, and they have what they call trommels that go round and around and separate paper out. Then they have optical sorters that identify what type of plastic bottles you've got, and they try and separate them out. The trouble is the packaging companies keep on changing the labels and changing the designs of the bottles, so it's not that efficient because it can't recognise the new ones.
Okay.
So if you go and bag everything separately, they don't have the facility to deal with it separately. So you'll go to all that effort, which is brilliant, but then they'll just rip the bag open. If you're lucky, if you put it in a black bag, they probably won't even rip it open, it'll just go straight to landfill.
It would be good to have some more bins like the clothing bins.
Yeah.
I mean, they say they're dotted around, everybody knows them, they're recycled, says recycled, but you don't put clothing in them. So if you had one, actually, no, maybe they have got paper, some of them are doing it paper, but anyway, if you had that in the communities, then you could actually do that, bundle up the newspaper, bundle up cardboard, boom,
So,
glass, whatever. But
there are several centres lying around, but part of what we're seeing with the movement, especially is, so currently the waste levy, when you dispose of something to landfill, every tonne you dispose of, you get charged $20. That's increased since last year by $10, and it's increasing by an extra $40 in the next 3 years. The revenue from that fund will go into waste minimisation projects. I would imagine one of the waste minimisation projects will be trying to get legislation up and running, which is around exactly that. So container return scheme, where manufacturers,
yes, they do it.
so manufacturers take responsibility for it. They tack on a 5 or 10% extra amount onto each individual item that's sold. And then what you do as a consumer, you then take it back to a recycling facility, separate it out, and you get that 10 cents back.
Some rubbish collection places do that as well. I'm just thinking of Matarangi, they have, it's a whole recycling thing, including the bikes, washing machines, they
Yeah.
have whole sections, and it's like a shop. Anyway, you put in your glass, you put in brown glass,
It's kind of easier in those smaller communities, because up north they've got them as well, but somewhere like Auckland, you've actually got to drive quite a distance to them.
Yeah, Henderson has one.
Yeah.
The
We just
Henderson
need a,
one's
we need a
great.
nice recycling, like right in the middle of the Riviera.
Yeah.
Or at every supermarket.
Those
Yeah, I saw a good idea in Australia, they have like a vending machines for plastic bottles and you
Yeah.
really get money back.
Yeah.
It's actually, they place them in front of supermarket or like a clothing bin, like, it is
Exactly
really good. And
Well,
we
what
make
you
money.
what you can in some supermarkets is you get your meat trays or whatever, and then you can actually take the meat out, put it in your container, and leave the plastic at the
Alright.
supermarket.
At the butcher.
But what happens to that? I've seen great big bags filled with plastic, and it's all contaminated because it's had food in
It's
it,
got meat.
taken it out. You've done a good thing, but have you? Because
What they do.
yeah, it's just really the same thing, but they're doing it.
Yeah. And I think that, especially in the next 5 years, we hopefully will see a shift from the items that we consume. We will see a shift from the packaging, the responsibility of the packaging shifting from us back to manufacturers,
Manufacturers.
ideally.
And if we all buy less of it. you know.
Exactly. We wouldn't have to do it in the first place. Cool. Off topic a little bit, but what does cardboard get made back into? So those little corrugations, most corrugations in New Zealand are from a recycled source. So all of that cardboard layer there, that corrugated layer is recycled content. The two liners on either side of the corrugated cardboard is generally from a virgin content. It's extract from a tree. And if it's a low enough grade and there's paper and commingled paper and all sorts in there, what will happen is it'll get made into a low grade item, such as an egg carton or a fruit tray.
And what about the toilet rolls? That's low grade cardboard, isn't it? 'Cause it's already been recycled.
Craft,
Is that true?
yeah,
Craft.
it's craft.
So
Yeah,
there's cardboard box craft.
Yeah.
Layers of.
yeah, layers and layers. Yeah, I think there's over, Tim said it before, there's over 50 different grades of tradable paper. Cool, mixed recycling. What don't we want in there? Plastic cutlery. We have no way of telling what resin that plastic is. So as a result, we can't actually do anything with it. I have seen the odd piece of plastic cutlery which says compostable on the bottom. I wouldn't trust that, to be honest. If it doesn't say certified commercially compostable and have a little logo saying which standard it adheres by, I wouldn't put that in the compost.
And even if
At
it
home
does,
or commercial.
your compost shouldn't be going in your recycling. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter whether it looks like it's a plastic plate or plastic knife.
Compostable coffee cup or non-compostable coffee cup. So the compostable coffee cup is great for a commercial food waste service. If it's just going back out to a farm where there's compost system, I wouldn't be putting that in there. Actually, I might talk to that at the food waste section between the difference between commercial and home composting. No one really uses plastic bags anymore, but that shouldn't be going in there. That can go to your soft plastic recycling scheme at the supermarket. This one, Tetra Pak. So earlier I spoke about contamination at a high level as a material in the wrong waste stream. This is contamination at a very sort of, I guess you'd call it a micro level. So macro versus micro level contamination. So at the micro level, this Tetra Pak bottle has a plastic liner on the inside, which protects the aluminium liner, which keeps heat in or out, whatever it may be, which has a paper liner so that marketers can make a nice logo on it, etc., which has a plastic liner which marketers like because it makes their product shiny. To top it all off, they've got a little cap at the top, which is a completely different plastic to all the other plastic in there. So for that to be recycled, we would have to pull out all of the different contaminating materials. And by the time we pick that up and pull the plastic out, pull the aluminium out, pull the paper out, it doesn't make sense. We'd be out of business in a flash. Yeah. There are options in the UK, if the UK office is dialing in. So Tetra Pak is a UK company and they have set up their own responsibility, or it's essentially an extended producer responsibility scheme where Tetra Pak said, send it all back to us and we'll recycle what we can.
In that mixed recycling bin at home, they will take plastics 1s to 7s. I don't know whether you know what all your numbers are.
I'm getting there.
Are you going to talk about what Busy do?
About.
1s to 7s?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do we want? 1s, 2s, and 5s. 5s have been a recent addition. The only reason they've been added is because they're one of the only plastics that you can put hot items in. All the other plastics are relatively porous resins, so you can't.
So 1, 2, and 5, we can put in our home recycling bins.
Yeah. And at work.
And it worked.
At work, though,
Yeah.
you can't put in 3s, 4s, 6s, or 7s.
But at home.
At home you
And
can.
I still post it to mine.
But at home, so they accept it. What they actually do is that they say they've been storing it for 5 years. I'm not sure how big their warehouse / yard is. So in reality, plastic's free, PVC, pretty toxic in itself. I'll try and avoid that anyway. Plastics 4 is readily recyclable, but not in mixed recycling. It's a soft plastic. Plastic 5 is okay. Plastic 6, polystyrene, pretty nasty in itself. Plastic 7, number 7 is a category which is literally anything else. So anything which doesn't fall under plastics 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we could get a whole mix of different plastics in there. We wouldn't have a clue what plastics are actually in there. So we can't actually recycle it.
And to give you that example I did with paper, how plastics are recycled. Generally, you take a piece of plastic, you chop it up into tiny little pieces, and then you give it to a remanufacturer. That remanufacturer sticks it in an extrusion machine, heats it up to the required temperature to make it molten, and then extrudes it into another form to make into more material. So therein lies your problem. 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s all have different melt points, all at different temperatures can be molten, can be flammable, can be explosive. 7s, you don't know what you're getting. So if you have them mixed and it goes to a plant and he heats it up, he doesn't know whether his machine's going to blow up, seize up, or whatever. So that's why it's really important to separate them.
So it's definitely not a 7.
Definitely not 7 because you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah.
But at home they will accept.
Okay, so what happens with Visi?
So Visi will separate out all the items. We've got trummels, all sorts that Tim mentioned earlier. So the trummels, essentially what happens is all the lighter items get pushed up and over, and all the heavier items fall down. So the heavier items might be steel cans, for example. The lighter items might be plastic or paper. Next step of the process is an optical sorter. And the optical sorter is trained to recognize the shape and not the individual resin, so what the plastic's actually made of, the shape of the bottle or the physical characteristics of the bottle. So it's trained to recognize a milk bottle that is whole.
Recognize that one.
Yeah, exactly. It's trained to recognize that. It isn't trained to recognize number 7, number 6.
So
So-
we shouldn't squish our plastics down.
Oh, no, so they're trained,
Yeah.
they're trained to see, so basically it's just a camera.
Yeah.
And it's hooked up to a computer, and as something goes past the camera, it says, have you got something you recognise this as? And you've got 10 different pictures of milk bottles in various forms, from full to smashed up to dirty.
Yeah.
And it says, oh yeah, I've got one of those, and then it recognises that as milk.
Right.
But if all of a sudden they change that cap to a orange cap, then it won't recognise it as that milk.
Or it'll
And
recognize.
sorry, there was a thing about not taking the tops off the bottles. Yeah.
So essentially what happens is when it comes across a sort line, people sort, we have people on ours, it's a manual sorting line, they sort out contamination. At the end of that sort line, it drops down a chute, and at the base of that chute is a baler or compactor. So it has big, massive metal plates, big hydraulic arms that squish it in all directions. They squish it down to a really high density bale that weighs anywhere from 200 to 400 kilos. When it falls down that chute, when it gets baled, what happens is when you squeeze that, the top will fall off, you'll clog the machine up, it might fall out, luckily it might fall out,
Hit you in the eye.
or hit someone in the eye, yeah. So the best way to make sure that, exactly like this, so if you squash it, yeah, and then twist
So,
the cap on.
yeah, and that's a different plastic anyway, isn't it? Would that be?
That's okay.
Oh, that's okay.
So that's, both of those are plastic number 2.
Right.
That ring around there and the top is number 2.
So the big manufacturers like Frontier and stuff are a bit more onto it because they realise the full process. But there must be lots of alternatives where so what do you do to be sure as a person at home, like take the cap off and don't recycle with the cap on?
Yeah.
Would that be more reliable?
The more you can do,
Yeah.
the more sure you are going to be.
Yeah,
Mm.
because you don't want to go all the effort and then actually the whole load of
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's added to the problem,
Mm.
unfortunately. So if you take the cap off, what do you do with the caps? They just throw it away? Or
The
they-
caps, there are a couple of recycling. Unfortunately, those recycling options are voluntary.
Right.
So I'm
But
thinking,
at least the bulk of the item.
Well, unfortunately, what Visi do is because they have to take everything because there's no education. You know, council doesn't do this. Council's not paying for us to be here.
No.
The government is abdicating its responsibility to educate anyone in anything. And it doesn't matter whether it's Labour or National, they all abdicate their responsibility. You've got to try and educate yourself and do the best you can do. Visi will pick up 1s to 7s in your blue bin. And they will separate out as best they can, 1s, 2s and 5s. All the rest go to landfill. Now, yes, there are processes that can be undertaken with the others, but generally it's not commercial. Okay? It's already cost a few $1 million to pick it up from all your residences around Auckland.
Yeah.
To then separate it, it's cost another few million, to then go through another one step, because that's all you can do with the non-recyclable stuff. You can go one step recycling past that, but again, it's another few $1 million to do that. There's just no value in it.
So really, even at home, we should just try to stick to 1s, 2s and 5s.
or
Well, put it this way, it's going to go to landfill if you put it in your blue bin.
Yeah.
If you put it in your red bin, it's going to go to landfill.
Mm.
What you're better to do, and buy it.
and that's one of
Don't buy it.
the, yeah.
Yeah.
And-
You have to buy something because there aren't
Yeah, if you do
Yeah,
happen to have
glass.
it,
milk bottles.
it's gonna go in for either way, so it's some of
that
those.
are-
Lewis Road Creamery is brilliant.
Well, yeah, I was going to say at a reasonable price.
Yeah.
But-
Yeah.
So given, you know, yeah, so what's the best that we can do at home? Just 1, 2s and 5s, absolutely uncontaminated.
Yeah.
As best we can, so that at least they're picked up by the machinery properly.
And vote with your wallets, with your
Yeah,
purses. Because the supermarkets won't buy it if you're not buying it.
No. So that's a long-term and a short-term strategy.
Exactly.
At the same time, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, so specifically, what do we want? Number 1, PET. Classic example is a plastic bottle, plastic water bottle, plastic juice bottle, Coke bottle, soft drink bottle. Plastic number 2, HDPE. That's essentially pretty much what those are, is milk bottles and shampoo bottles / cleaning bottles. Remove the top, the spray part of the cleaning bottle, and only dispose of that. That's got all sorts of different plastics in there. What else? We want some cans, steel, aluminium. The great thing about cans, and something which isn't replicable in plastics, is that these are recycled endlessly. Plastics go through a couple of rounds before the plastic's been degraded so much that it can't be recycled anymore.
And glass is another one that is continuous.
Glass, yeah,
Glass you can continually.
Glass, you lose essentially nothing.
But if you're going for a Coke, you better get a can open.
Do we need to take the wrapper off?
Yeah, if
plastic
in, if in that
bottle.
one, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
best practice, just rip it off.
as opposed to not buying it at all. But,
Well, yeah.
that's not, yeah, but you've got to be realistic, like,
Yeah.
that's not gonna happen all the time, is it?
So
What are
when
you
did
gonna put in your
fives, when did
Exactly.
What's that, sorry?
when did the
Oh, yeah.
fives get introduced?
So the 5s have been lurking about for a couple of years. But in terms of, from our perspective, what we sell as 5s, the market is just so turbulent. One day it's there, the next day it's not.
Right.
So it's finally seeing some stability now, so that fives can actually be accepted. And the other issue with fives is that they're actually really hard to, I'm actually pretty sure that is a number one. So to actually pick that up, whether it's optical sorting or manual sorting, for someone to separate is that 1 or 5, by the time they've picked up the container, looked at it, we've lost money on that already. Yeah.
And the really hard items are things that come in multiple product types. So give you an example, sushi trays. A sushi tray could be a 1, 2, 5 or 7. And what that means is optical sorters banish all sushi trays to landfill
That's too
because you can't separate them.
Exactly. Cool. So what does it get made into? This is an example of a pretty cool Kiwi company called Future Post. You guys might have heard of them. What they do, they're pretty much behind the soft plastics recycling scheme. They teamed up with Plastics New Zealand to create this scheme. And what they do is they grind it all. They wash the plastic, grind it all down, extrude it, and then they create these fence posts that can then go and be put on farms. They're actually really big in the kiwi fruit industry, I believe.
So that's one step recycling. Once it goes into the environment, it will start to break down because of UV.
Yep.
Nobody really knows how long it's going to last
As a fence post.
as a fence
Yep.
post. Once it has started breaking down, it's UV damage, so it's highly likely you cannot reuse that and make it into another fence post. So it's that one-step recycling.
Yeah, so it's not the circular one.
It's definitely not circular, and it's really expensive because it's getting rid of our problem items.
And all things aside, yes, it's an okay short-term solution, but long-term, that could be quite disastrous. Yeah. Similar story as Adidas, probably recognize the 3 stripes. Adidas and Parley, and being an ocean conservation company, teamed up, created their Parley range. I think some of the Super Rugby teams did use Parley material as well. What they said is, give us all of your PET that you find along the beach fronts and the ocean, etc. What we'll do with that PET, we'll bring it back, wash it, we'll grind it down, and then what we're going to do is actually make polyester fibers. So the upper of that shoe, the sort of cotton / polyester upper, is from recycled plastic, or it has a recycled plastic content. Again, one-step recycling. At the end of life, the best thing you can do is take that to a Salvation Army or a reuse centre. But outside of that, there's not really that much. It's just Croxley, another cool Kiwi company, I think. They take polypropylene and some polystyrene, and what they do with it is the exact same with other plastic manufacturers. They grind it down, etc., and then they'll extrude it and make the heels and shoes, or they'll make picture frames.
So a lot of your stilettos, ladies, are actually recycled material. And it's polystyrene a lot of the time. Old coat hangers.
Last but not least, this is probably my favourite. If you haven't tried the recent collab with Kailua, the chocolate liqueur from Lewis Road, it's unreal. I would highly recommend it. But these guys in all of their plastic bottles use rPET, which is recycled PET. So what they've done is they've said, we're going to buck the curve a bit, we're going to get ahead of the game, we're going to start using recycled content. What that means now is that it's a little bit more expensive, but in the future, it could well be the other way around. And they've also got a great brand placement in terms of we're using recycled content.
Is that the same stuff Flight Plastics uses in Welly?
Yep.
To make the strawberry trays and all that?
They also
So-
do the refilleries, right, the glass bottles.
Even
At
better,
some
yeah.
places, yeah.
So this is talking about recycling. One step better would be reuse and refill. Cool. Everything makes sense? Awesome. Food waste. What don't we want? Plastic. Essentially plastic. We don't want that. Any form of plastic. Polystyrene, that's a plastic. Tea bags, an interesting one.
Yeah, we
So-
shouldn't have them because the coatings, the bags are plastic.
Yeah.
They got plastic in them.
And so most tea bags, unless it states on the box certified compostable or certified home compostable because your food waste is going to the home composting system, I wouldn't touch them. So tea bags in similar fashion to what we were talking about just before, the plastic laminate, which means that water can't get through it. Tea bags are similar in that sense. They have a polypropylene lining. Could be where that credit card of microplastics is coming from, not sure. What that does is means if little drips of water get onto the tea bag, it doesn't just leach out. When it's fully submerged, that's when it leaches out. The other part about tea bags as well is this. So this might be cotton, it might be a polyester cotton mix, it could be anything. On top of that, there's probably a staple there. Metal doesn't go well in compost.
So that absolutely can't go in our food waste bin.
No.
Even if it was compostable, the likelihood is that it is commercially compostable. So the difference between commercial and home composting is quite vast.
Probably about 300 degrees.
Yeah, so commercial composting has all of these settings that it has to degrade in. So it has to degrade in 3 months to a certain size. To do that, it is applied with quite high heat. It's also applied with a lot of air, so it's aerated
So
heavily.
they're trying to speed up the composting process, whereas at home you can let it degrade for a year or 2 years.
So in a commercial setting, it has to degrade in 3 months. That's one of the
Right.
certifications. That's one of the things that you have to do to adhere with certification. At home, that can be slightly less than that. Normally, a home compost, if you're doing it well, takes about 9 months, 8 to 9
And
months.
will that tea bag decompose eventually in a home compost?
It will, but you'll be left with microplastics
Yes.
Right.
unless it is certified as 100% compostable.
Yeah.
So you just
Because-
build up like.
Because these go back to diffusers and resting.
Absolutely. Everything that
Taste there.
adds to our convenience
Yeah,
is generally means it's,
taking away. from
made in a bad way.
That's why you trade them.
Yeah. The other one, raw meat, not only does that attract vermin, but it has the off chance that it contaminates the end product in compost.
Now, if you do a Bokashi composting system, you can put your raw meat in, you can put your bones, and you can put everything in there.
Fish.
So if you do have a lot of leftover bones and meat, look into Bokashi composting rather than air composting.
What do we want?
Yes, I'm showing you. how-
That shouldn't be there because that is commercially compostable, not home compostable. The same goes for that. So doesn't look like. This is where it gets confusing. This is where before this job I had no idea, but now it's like you're at the top. You're like the top 5% who actually are aware. So these guys, Biopack, awesome what they're doing. They're making commercially compostable food serves. The tough thing is that most people will see that and go, "Oh, it's plastic, I'll pop that in my recycling." One, it's contaminating the recycling. Two, it's commercially compostable, so it could be diverted from landfill in the first place. Three, eventually it's actually just going to landfill. So in this scenario, don't put either of those in your food waste until you set up a commercial composting service.
Is that a tissue on the left?
So that is a paper towel.
I'll put it down, so it goes into the.
So paper towels are fine.
So even
And
if they, aren't they bleached or dyed?
toilet paper is.
Most of them now,
Not hand towels.
even when they're coloured, have got vegetable colouring,
Yeah.
so they're okay. But if you are concerned of the colouring, don't put them in.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just while we're talking about that, with our little composter, I've said no paper or anything, because in a minute that would be full.
Yeah.
So we can just put it in the,
Yeah.
so just food for that one. Anyway.
So your hand towels can't go in the paper bin,
Yeah.
Right, no.
but your hand towels can go in the composting system.
These are biodegrade, but not completely recyclable.
I'm not going to answer that because I hate the word biodegrade, which I'm sure Don will come to.
Because they were-
That's all right. Yeah. So paper towels, because they've got water in it, when we send paper off, what we need it to adhere by is one, contamination. We're only allowed 0.5% contamination per bale, something along those lines. Two, and this sort of leads into the contamination argument, is water. It has to be a really strict moisture content, really, really low. If not, by the time it gets to wherever it's ending up, it'll be mouldy everywhere. And yeah, they'll just end up.
One trick for your commercially compostable items is if you've got a home composting system, chop them up. Get a pair of scissors to them and chop them up as small as you can, and then you'll be able to home compost.
Sweet. And to make things even more confusing, we've got some nice examples here. Commercially compostable, not talking about home compostable. Who thinks that's commercially compostable? Yeah. Doesn't say anything on the lip. So normally it's under there. So it's commercially compostable. What about these ones?
By the time you pick up your coffee, you check and spill all over
Exactly. Yeah. So that one, and both of those are commercially compostable. So you could chop it up and pop it in there. I wouldn't put that in there. That is, some of them are commercially compostable, some of them are polystyrene.
You've got to be really careful when you're buying that. You look at the bottom of your cup and it says commercially compostable, but you look at your lid and it's got a big PS 5 on it. 6. Oh, sorry, 6. Sorry, stickers on fruit,
Big no-no.
take off.
Yep.
Don't put them in your composting.
Yep.
And anything that is compostable, treat it like an apple core. So if you're looking at that BioPack one in the middle there, if you've got that and it says commercially compostable and you know what it is, you have to treat it like an apple core. You wouldn't put an apple core in your brassic bin. And that's what you've got to teach everyone at home.
So, firstly, I'll talk about biodegradable versus compostable. Secondly, I'm going to talk about methane and landfills. So, firstly, biodegradable. Biodegradable, if you break the word down, it degrades in a biological setting. So, that plastic bottle will degrade in a biological setting.
Uranium is biodegradable.
Yeah. It might take 1,000 years, but eventually it will degrade. Compostable, as I mentioned before, has all of these settings that it has to follow in order for it to actually be classed as compostable.
So the rule of thumb is if it says it's biodegradable, it means it's bad.
Yeah.
Biodegradable.
If it says it's biodegradable, it means it's bad. Because otherwise it would say it's compostable.
Right.
So that one, 100% biodegradable.
So that's just a little cunning matter, is it?
Exactly, that's all it is.
They genuinely should be fine for greenwashing.
Right.
Yeah.
So they go into
Rubbish.
That's rubbish.
Genuinely.
No, what I've been trying to tell you.
Degradable, biodegradable,
Yeah.
green.
Oxo-degradable, it's
Yeah.
been banned. But yeah. The other part, if food waste enters landfills, what happens is it breaks down anaerobically, so without oxygen. When it does that, it pretty much rots. When it rots, what happens is that it emits methane. Now, methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases there is. So we measure everything by carbon dioxide, kilograms of carbon dioxide. Methane is 34 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So the factor that we use, methane, is so much greater. So every time you throw an apple core into the landfill bin, it's going to landfill, it'll rot and emit methane. That's where our emissions come from in waste.
Landfills like organics.
Yeah.
Because that means they can sell the space several times.
And
So they can only fill the landfill up to a certain amount. Every time it breaks down, they can fill it up a little bit more, so they get to charge several times for the same space.
And some landfills have greenhouse gas capture methods in place, pretty much pipes that run through the middle of each of the landfill spaces. They capture greenhouse gases. They can then burn those gases and generate energy, electricity, and sell the electricity.
So if you take that position of biodegradable means bad,
Yeah.
if a landfill company is telling you we're powering our trucks from the electricity generated from the landfill, you know they've got a bad landfill.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's come from a bad source.
Well, they shouldn't have any electricity, any methane in the landfill.
So in fact, one up by Albany, used to have a constant burner.
Yeah.
So that's what they were doing, basically.
They're just burning off the methane.
And
Amazing how we change in
Yeah.
20 years, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
most waste companies say that they have really good methane capture systems in place. In reality, there's 2, I think, in New Zealand, which have state-of-the-art methane capture technologies. They only capture around 90% of methane, so there's still 10% which.
And it must be a really expensive process for them as well. So the older ones.
Yeah.
It's really hard to convert.
And the way we like to think of, so food waste, at the end of, if you go through a composting system, generates compost, which can help nurture growth. It pretty much provides nutrients to the soil. So that the trees that we grow are bigger, they produce more fruit, etc. On the flip side of that, so that's generating growth, it's generating green spaces, it's acting as a carbon sink because all these plants are sucking up carbon. On the flip side, if we pop it in landfill, what happens is that we get to consume more. We get to consume more electricity. We get to charge our cars if they're electric. We get to go to the mall more because they've got more lights, and we like that more because they've got more lights, etc., etc. So in terms of, it's great because they're capturing the methane and they're using that as a renewable source of electricity, you've got to think of the other side. Cool. Secure document destruction. I talked a little bit about the different fiber types. Manila files, those ones can go in, because they're a similar fiber type to cardboard, they can go in the cardboard collection. This is similar to tea bags. That's got a plastic laminate around the outside, which means that moisture can't get in. So when you sell paper on a shelf in warehouse stationery, wherever it may be, what happens, that paper has to have a strict moisture content, and that plastic laminate means that paper doesn't have moisture.
More the point, you're paying, let's say, $30 a collection for that bin to be taken away. Why would you fill it with stuff that you can put in another bin and get it taken away for almost nothing?
Yeah.
The only thing that should be going in that bin is something with confidential information on it.
Yeah.
And it can't be receipts. Anything with a carbon capability. So if you've got your old order books where you've got your carbon paper, well, nowadays you don't get the carbon paper. Those books are what's called NCR. So you write on them and it still goes through the 3 copies. That can't be recycled. So if you put that in your secure bins, you're designating that to landfill.
Can we put pictures on the top of our bins or what?
Yeah. Like we're having a whole room at our new place with bins.
Awesome.
Oh, awesome, that's great.
We're getting rid of all the office bins. There won't be any bins in the office. So you have to go somewhere. It's all happening. Yeah, we can.
Cool. So what does paper get made into? Initially, what happens is it's all securely transported to our site. At our site, there's only 3 people who are allowed into this one sectioned off area. Goes to a giant shredder, and then eventually it gets turned back into these sorts of materials. So with secure documents, you can generally, from a recycler's perspective, we can guarantee that pile of recycling is really high quality, because with secure documents, it's not a matter of is this paper or is it not, is this confidential or not. So most of the time it's just paper that ends up. Cool. Printer cartridges. I didn't put don't put in here. slide out, just purely because it's relatively self-explanatory. But there's actually some great information on Croxley Recycling, the website for your current service provider.
Which we do use for our Canon printer here, but then it would be home printers as well.
So these guys, it steps out all the different materials that are in toners and printer cartridges, etc., and how they dispose of them. So what we want in here is printer cartridges, any sort of printer waste. With the toner, what they do is they burn it off. With the plastics, they recycle it. With the e-waste, it's pretty much urban mining. They're mining all of the precious metals out of there, gold, cadmium, etc.
I think the likes of your home cartridges you can take to warehouse
You
stations.
can actually take
like
that already.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Lastly, everything we just talked about and what shouldn't go in this bin should be going in here. So awful plastic like that, sushi trays which have a number 7 on them, plastic laminated paper. There's a couple of options out there which are, there's one Office Max one which is carbon neutral and it doesn't have a plastic laminate. So that's a pretty good alternative. Awful polystyrene clamshells and noodle boxes, and unfortunately Tetra Pak. There we go. Perfect.
I mean, that's rounded, so that's something else, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a plastic mixer.
That's not the one, is it?
No, that isn't the one.
No, that's laminated. I can see it from here.
And that says bamboo,
So when you,
green.
I'm not sure if you can see that. So normally when you tear paper, it tears really nicely. That just snaps. And even if you try and stretch it, you can see the plastic there.
And what about the other way? You know how you have a rift in a wall?
Yep.
Tear more easily the other way? No.
The other way you can actually stretch and
Oh,
there you
yeah.
go.
That's interesting.
So that's plastic there. Yeah.
Dang.
But Office Max do a
Yeah.
pure paper wrapper.
Yeah, it's a shame they closed down the actual physical office and near us. You have to just get stuff
I'll
online.
just put it online. Yeah. Cool. Now I'm not sure if this is going to work and what I can do. I'm not
Have you
sure.
guys got any questions while Dom's
Yeah.
trying to work that out?
I was just wondering about this too. There's some items here that I wasn't sure of. These fluoro bulbs.
Yep.
Like, what happens with those? I mean, can we recycle them or
Yes,
do
you
they
can.
just go in the landfill?
Well, if you put them in the landfill, they'll stay in the landfill.
Like that?
Exactly like that.
They're dangerous otherwise.
You can get them recycled, and there are several places. Dom will email you with,
Yeah, because
The,
we
guys
get
to
a whole
talk
box of them.
yeah, and what you do, they literally turn up, they send you a box, you fold it up and make a nice little box out of it. Line, you just keep it in your store it somewhere, you fill it up and then give it to them when it's full. Batteries is another thing that you should be thinking about as well. You should be, all your home batteries, do not put that in your landfill because that just aids the leachate. You might have heard last year and the year before, there's been quite a lot of fires in transfer stations and sorting facilities, and that's all because of batteries. Especially the lithium batteries, they just explode. So again, I'll get Dom to send through a couple of different suppliers you can go to. Again, you go to them, they send you a box, you just fill it up with your batteries, you have to keep the lithium separate. And then they'll just go and put them away and sort them out.
So at home, because you guys sort of, there's a combination of what we're doing here in a business and what we do at home. So if we're at home with batteries, other than bringing them in here and putting them in
Then you have to do the same thing, but from a home perspective.
And what are these? This doesn't have any kind of plastic number on it. That would probably be a 7.
Have a look.
That's
Oh, wait a
only
minute.
a PP.
Oh, there's something in the corner there that I can't see. It's a definite cardboard infested.
No wonder governments. It's actually a really complex.
They cleverly left it off.
And they are making don't be surprised if we start going into a bit of a draconian state in the next few years, where they start to say, right, we're not allowing polystyrene into the country in the future. That's horrible. And I would suggest that whenever you buy your next television or washing machine or whatever it is, you say to the company you're buying it from, yes, I'll buy this,
but it's not
as long
coming
as
out
you
on
agree to take back everything.
You want
Because
Oh,
until everything gets forced back on the guys selling stuff, they're never going to stop doing that.
So in terms of refilleries, there's, I've seen you all starting to do some, and then there's the overall refillery store. Like where, like if we wanted to cut down on that, usually like here we